January 28, 1975, 2:17 a.m. The room has no windows, no escape. Just 4 concrete walls, 1 metal table, and the weight of 70 years pressing down like a coffin lid. Frank Lucas sits in handcuffs. The man who once moved, 1 million a day in pure heroin. The ghost who flew to Bangkok and stole the sky from the Italian Mafia. The king who built an empire on a single rule, silence. Across from him sits Detective Richie Roberts, the only honest cop in New Jersey, the man who turned in $250,000 in drug money when he could have bought a house. Between them, a manila folder, 5 inches thick, inside names, dates, wiretaps. The entire Italian underworld laid bare like a dissected corpse. "You have 48 hours, Frank," Roberts says, sliding the folder across the steel table. The sound scrapes like a blade against bone. 48 hours to decide who you really are. Frank doesn't touch the folder. He knows what's inside. The Genovese family. The Gambino captains. The corrupt judges who take envelopes stuffed with cash. The nip narcotics detectives who sell evidence for heroin money. The same Italians who called him nobody while he made them millions. The same system that tried to crush him. "Give me the mob," Roberts continues, his voice steady as a death sentence, "and you keep your life. Stay silent, and you die in a cage." For 20 years, Frank Lucas lived by Bumpy Johnson's code: the loud man dies. The silent man lives. He never flashed wealth, never trusted middlemen, never broke the rules of the street. But the street didn't protect him. The Italians didn't respect him. And now, the system wants him to become the one thing he swore he'd never be: a snitch. Roberts leans forward. "You think they're protecting you? The Italians are already cutting deals. They're blaming you for everything while they walk free. The only difference is, you can talk first." Frank stares at the folder. Inside that folder is the power to destroy the Italian Mafia's stranglehold on New York, to burn down the corrupt system that kept his people under their boot, to expose the judges, the cops, the politicians who sold their badges for blood money. But it's also the death of everything he believed in, everything Bumpy taught him, everything that made him a legend. The clock on the wall ticks. 2:18 a.m., 47 hours and 42 minutes remaining. "This didn't start in this room," Frank says, his voice barely above a whisper. "This started when I decided to steal their crown." This is the untold story of Frank Lucas. And the deal that changed everything. January 28, 1975. 4:17 a.m. The hour when honest men sleep and kings fall. Teaneck, New Jersey sits in pre-dawn darkness, suburban lawns frozen under winter silence. Inside the brick mansion at the end of Maple Street, Frank Lucas sleeps beside his wife. The invisible emperor of heroin, the ghost who stole the crown from the Italian Mafia, the man who built a 1 million a day empire on a single rule: never be seen. But ghosts cast shadows, and shadows can be tracked. 18 unmarked federal vehicles converge on the mansion like wolves circling wounded prey. No sirens, no lights, just the quiet precision of men who spent 5 years preparing for 60 minutes of destruction. Detective Richie Roberts sits in the lead car, holding a photograph. The same photograph he studied obsessively for 4 years. A black man in a $50,000 chinchilla coat, sitting front row at the Ali Frazier fight. A man who shouldn't exist according to every DIA intelligence report ever compiled. The front door explodes inward at exactly 4:19 a.m. Federal agents flood through every entrance simultaneously. Upstairs, downstairs, through windows, through the garage. The choreography is flawless because they've rehearsed it 17 times. Frank reaches for the nightstand but freezes when red laser dots dance across his chest. 3 sights, 3 agents, 3 reasons to remember Bumpy Johnson's voice, The silent man lives. In the attic, they find the first coffin. $584,000 in cash wrapped in plastic, hidden behind insulation. Money that could buy the entire neighborhood. In the basement, heroin processing equipment still warm from the previous night's work. In the study, 7 years of financial records documenting every transaction, every shipment, every dollar. Frank kept records because he was a businessman. Those records will now guarantee he dies in a cage. But Teaneck is only the beginning. At that exact moment, federal agents kicked down doors across 3 states. Frank's mother's house in North Carolina, his brother's apartments in Brooklyn and the Bronx, his cousins in Newark, his uncles in rural Virginia. The Country Boys network, built on blood loyalty and family trust, collapses like a house of cards. 26 arrests in 6 hours. An entire empire dismantled before breakfast. This level of coordination required something Frank never gave them: visibility. For 15 years, he was the anti-Nicky Barnes. No flashy cars, no magazine covers, no peacock displays of wealth. He drove a modest Chevy while importing pure heroin directly from Southeast Asia in the coffins of dead soldiers. He wore unremarkable clothes while bypassing Italian middlemen entirely. He was untouchable because nobody knew he existed. Until March 8, 1971. The fight of the century. Alley versus Frazier at Madison Square Garden. Frank made the mistake that cost him his life. He wanted to be seen. Just once, he walked into that arena wearing a chinchilla coat worth more than most houses, sitting in seats better than the Italian Godfathers. Up in the cheap seats, Roberts saw that coat and asked the question that destroyed everything. Who the hell is Frank Lucas? That question grew claws. It walked into bank vaults and phone companies and military records. It lived in stakeouts and late-night surveillance. It ignored warnings from corrupt cops who told Roberts to chase Italians instead of ghosts. 4 years of obsession. 4 years of building a case against a man who didn't officially exist. By 6 a.m., Frank sits in handcuffs in a federal processing center. The invisible king made visible. The ghost made flesh. The legend made prisoner. And that's when he sees something that turns his blood to ice water. Nicky Barnes sits in the same holding area, along with 30 other black dealers, faces from Harlem, Brooklyn, every corner the blue magic empire touched. But no Italians, not one. The Genovese captains who controlled the docks, the Gambino soldiers who ran the airports, the Lucchese families who moved heroin through pizza parlors. None of them in handcuffs. The federal government just executed the largest coordinated drug bust in American history and somehow only arrested black dealers. Frank understands immediately. This isn't justice. This is strategy. They want someone to talk, someone to expose the real power structure, someone to burn down the Italian empire that's been untouchable for 50 years. The room is segregated by an invisible line of corruption. Black dealers in chains, Italian mobsters in their beds. The silence is over. The game has just changed. And Frank Lucas realizes he has a choice that isn't really a choice: become the rat that destroys the system, or die quietly in a cage while the real kings walk free. The 48-hour countdown begins now. Rewind 7 years. 1968. Harlem burns while America pretends it's healing. Martin Luther King's blood is still fresh on a Memphis balcony. And cities explode in riots that look like revolution but smell like desperation. The civil rights dream bleeds into black power, which bleeds into chaos, which bleeds into the streets where Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson has ruled for 30 years. But inside the smoky backroom of Small's Paradise on 7th Avenue, the noise fades to whispers, cigars burn, cards slap. And one man sits at the center like a king counting his final days. Bumpy Johnson, is dying. His heart condition isn't a secret anymore. The tremors in his hands, the way he catches his breath after climbing stairs, the crimson he coughs into white handkerchiefs. Everyone can see the throne emptying. Every lieutenant, every enforcer, every hungry young dealer watches and waits like vultures circling wounded prey. But Frank Lucas doesn't circle. Frank drives. Frank listens. Frank learns. In these final months, Bumpy stops giving orders and starts giving lessons. He teaches Frank the brutal mathematics of their existence, how the Italians control everything that matters. The docks where heroin arrives from Marseille. The longshoremen who look the other way. The police captains who sell their badges for envelopes stuffed with cash. Every ounce of poison that hits Harlem streets comes through Italian hands first. They step on it, dilute it from 90% pure to 30% garbage, double the price, and sell the scraps to black dealers who are forced to say thank you. We do the work, Bumpy explains one night in the back of Frank's car, his voice carrying 30 years of paying tribute to white men. We take the risk. We take the bullets. But they take the tax. He pauses, hand pressed against his failing heart. We're making them rich while they call us animals. Frank watches the other men nod and accept this reality like weather, unchangeable, inevitable, the way things have always been. But Frank's jaw tightens. He sees it differently. This isn't respect. This is slavery with better clothes. The Italians let black dealers work the dangerous corners, face the guns, fill the morgues, then tax them 40% for the privilege of being exploited. One night, Bumpy brings Frank to a sit-down with an Italian captain in a midtown restaurant. Red leather booths, white tablecloths, waiters who know exactly when to vanish. The captain smiles too wide, his threats dipped in sugar. Bumpy, we respect you. Always have. But the price is the price. You want our product, you pay our number. That's how it works. Bumpy smiles back. It doesn't touch his eyes. Your number keeps going up, Tony. Streets don't like it. Tony shrugs like he's discussing the weather. Streets don't talk to me. You do. You keep them in line. We keep the supply flowing. That's the arrangement. Frank watches this exchange like a student studying cancer. Two men pretending to be partners when everyone knows the truth. One is landlord, one is tenant. One owns the building. The other pays rent to breathe. On the ride back to Harlem, Bumpy is quiet. Finally, he grips Frank's shoulder with surprising strength. You see that? They don't respect us. They respect the money. They think we're interchangeable. One black dealer dies, another takes his place. His eyes find Frank's in the rearview mirror. Never be loud, never trust the Italians, and never let them see you coming. July 7th, 1968. Bumpy Johnson dies in Wells' restaurant, not from a bullet, but from his own failing heart. No blaze of glory. No final shootout. Just a body on the floor and an empire with no king. The funeral is massive. Every gangster, every hustler, every player in Harlem comes to pay respects. They cry, they eulogize, then immediately begin fighting over territory like dogs over scraps. Frank Lucas doesn't fight. While other lieutenants wage war over Harlem corners, Frank disappears so completely that people forget he existed. Because Bumpy didn't just leave him money or territory. He left him something more dangerous, a vision of what the game could become if someone was brave enough to break every rule. 6 months later, Frank Lucas boards a plane to Bangkok. Not as a tourist, not as a soldier, as something the Italians never anticipated, a direct competitor walking into their supply chain. He's going to the Golden Triangle, where the opium that feeds their empire grows in jungle mountains they've never seen. And he has a plan so audacious it borders on insanity. Use American military transport planes returning from Vietnam as his personal smuggling fleet. The Italians are still collecting their taxes, still assuming the natural order will never change. They have no idea that halfway around the world, Frank Lucas is about to steal their entire empire. Between 1968 and 1975, Frank Lucas doesn't just enter the heroin trade, he revolutionizes it with the precision of a mathematician and the invisibility of a ghost. He returns from the Golden Triangle with something the Italian Mafia never possessed: direct access to the source. No Corsican middlemen in Marseille demanding percentages, no Turkish smugglers taking their cut, no Italian captains taxing product before it touches American soil. Frank goes straight to the warlords who control opium fields in mountains the mafia bosses have never seen, paying $4,000 per kilo for heroin that arrives in the flag-draped coffins of fallen American soldiers. The mathematics are devastating. While Italian families pay $50,000 per kilo for product that's been stepped on 6 times, Frank pays a fraction for pure medicine that hasn't been touched by human greed. He cuts costs by 90% and delivers heroin that's 98% pure compared to the mafia's 30% garbage. The brand becomes legend, blue magic. 2 words that spread through Harlem, Brooklyn, the Bronx like wildfire through dry grass. Dealers abandon Italian suppliers because the numbers don't lie. Better product, better price, better profit. Junkies overdose because their bodies can't handle real medicine after years of poisoned substitutes. At its peak, the operation grosses over $1 million per day in cash that needs its own warehouse. But Frank's genius isn't just economic, it's architectural. He builds his empire on blood loyalty, importing his country boys from rural North Carolina. Men who know how to fix tractors but have never seen a skyscraper. Brothers, cousins, uncles who understand one law: family doesn't betray family. No street hustlers hungry for fame. No ambitious strangers with loose tongues. No phones for business. No written records except the ones locked in Frank's personal safe. The country boys move through New York like ghosts, invisible because they don't belong to the city's criminal ecosystem. This creates the perfect binary opposition with Nicky Barnes, who chooses noise over silence, flash over substance. While Frank drives a modest Chevy Impala, Barnes cruises in a fleet of Mercedes. While Frank wears department store suits, Barnes drapes himself in custom Italian silk and fur coats worth more than houses. Frank lives quietly in suburban New Jersey. Barnes throws Manhattan penthouse parties with celebrities and models. Frank appears on no magazine covers. Barnes grins from the front page of the New York Times Magazine, calling himself Mr. Untouchable, daring the law to touch him. Federal agents plaster Barnes's photograph on office walls while Frank walks past them, carrying their most wanted man's crown. The Italians feel their empire hemorrhaging but can't diagnose the wound. Their corners dry up. Their dealers defect. Their profits collapse like buildings with rotten foundations. In restaurants across Little Italy, captains hold emergency meetings, voices rising in confusion and rage. Who's cutting into our territory? Who's selling better product at half our price? But they're looking for Italians, for someone who plays by their rules, operates within their understanding of power. Their racism becomes Frank's invisibility cloak. A black dealer from North Carolina isn't supposed to have international connections, isn't supposed to understand supply chain logistics, isn't supposed to be smart enough to steal their entire empire. Until March 8, 1971. Madison Square Garden. The fight of the century, Ali versus Frazier. Frank makes the decision that costs him everything. He wears a chinchilla coat worth $50,000, custom made, floor length, impossible to ignore. For the first time in 7 years, The invisible king wants to be seen. He sits front row with his wife, in seats better than the Italian godfathers, better than the movie stars, better than everyone. Up in the cheap seats, Detective Richie Roberts, an outcast honest cop desperate for one real case, sees that coat, those seats, that calm face surrounded by power. He leans forward, studying the scene like a hunter studying tracks. "Nobody doesn't sit front row," he mutters, tearing the newspaper photograph and sliding it into his jacket pocket. "Nobody doesn't wear a coat worth more than my house. Whoever he is, he's my target now." The investigation that will destroy Frank Lucas begins with vanity. The invisible empire cracks because the king wanted to be visible for 60 seconds. And loud men die. The photograph from the Ali Frazier fight sits on Richie Roberts' desk like a riddle that refuses to be solved. A black man in a 50,000 chinchilla coat sitting front row where kings sit, smiling like he owns the air around him. For 4 years, Roberts studies that face obsessively. The calm confidence, the expensive wife, the power that shouldn't exist according to every DIA intelligence file ever compiled. He begins with the only thing that doesn't lie: the mathematics. Who paid for those seats? The answer leads to shell companies. The shell companies lead to real estate portfolios. The real estate leads to cash transactions with no legitimate source. Roberts isn't chasing a photograph anymore. He's chasing a ghost who moves millions through an economy that exists entirely in shadows. Building an honest narcotics task force in 1970s New York is like constructing a church inside a whorehouse. Most of Roberts' colleagues are already married to the mafia. Italian captains slide envelopes across restaurant tables, and detective badges get sold cheaper than the heroin they're supposed to stop. Roberts becomes an outcast in his own department, the Boy Scout who once turned in $250,000 in seized drug money instead of splitting it with his partners. They call him stupid. They call him naive. But Roberts understands something they don't. Corruption makes you rich, but investigation makes you legendary. The hunt becomes scientific. Roberts analyzes blue magic samples seized from street dealers. Lab reports show heroin that's 98% pure, pharmaceutical-grade medicine that makes Italian product look like poisoned chalk. He follows the chemistry backward like a detective following blood trails. If the product is this pure, the source is close to origin. If the source is close to origin, someone is bypassing the entire Italian distribution network. Roberts assembles wiretaps, surveillance teams, financial subpoenas. He tracks not the noise, but the mathematics: who's buying property for cash, who's paying taxes on nothing while living like royalty in silence. Meanwhile, Frank's invisible empire faces visible threats. The Italian families escalate from confusion to fury to open warfare. Blue magic bleeds their profits dry, and corners once dominated by mafia-backed dealers now whisper one phrase: Frank's stuff is cleaner. In a dimly lit restaurant in Little Italy, 3 Genovese captains sit across from Frank, their smiles thin as razors. The oldest one leans forward, voice carrying 30 years of assumed authority. "Frank, you're doing good business. We respect that. But you're operating in our territory. There's a tax for that. Call it insurance." Frank's response is ice water poured on their assumptions. "I don't pay for what I own." The temperature drops 20 degrees. The captain's smile disappears entirely. "You own? You think you own Harlem? You think you own anything we don't let you own?" Frank stands, buttoning his modest jacket, voice calm as a death sentence. "I own my supply. I own my distribution. I own my corners. What exactly am I paying you for? Permission to breathe?" The meeting ends without handshakes. The war is now open. But empires crack from the inside before they crumble from outside pressure. Some of Frank's country boys start tasting the money, wanting the flash, craving the visibility that destroyed Nicky Barnes. His younger brother buys a Cadillac. A cousin starts wearing jewelry that catches light like a disco ball. Frank demands discipline, but the temptation is biblical. A trusted lieutenant, loyal for years, starts talking in the wrong bars to the wrong women in front of the wrong ears. The crack becomes Roberts's opening. January 27th, 1975. Two nets close simultaneously. Roberts assembles enough evidence for coordinated federal raids across 3 states. The same night, Frank receives intelligence that chills his blood. The Italians have issued a contract on his entire family. Death from the streets or life in a cage. The gun or the badge. As federal agents prepare pre-dawn raids, Frank lies awake in his Teaneck mansion, calculating odds that no longer calculate. The Invisible King has become the most visible target in America. The interrogation room clock ticks like a countdown to execution. Each second strips away another piece of the 48 hours Richie Roberts has given him to choose between 2 deaths. Physical death if he talks, spiritual death if he doesn't. Frank Lucas sits chained to cold metal, the man who once moved. 1 million a day in pure heroin, now unable to move his wrists without iron reminding him who holds power tonight. Across from him, Roberts slides a manila folder thick enough to hang 50 men. Inside, the architecture of corruption that built and destroyed empires. The Italians sent word through Rikers, Roberts says, his voice carrying the weight of inevitability. Stay quiet, they'll protect your family. He doesn't wait for Frank to respond. You believe that? They're protecting themselves, Frank. You're the scapegoat. The black dealer who disrupted their business made them look weak to the commission. Through prison channels, whispers passed in food lines, messages hidden in legal documents, the mafia's promise arrives wrapped in velvet threats. But Frank recognizes the language beneath the courtesy. In their world, protection means a knife between the ribs in a shower stall, means his mother's house burning in North Carolina while she sleeps, means his brothers found in car trunks with bullets in their skulls. The Italians don't forgive disruption, they erase it. Roberts plays his final card, sliding a wiretap transcript across the steel table. Read this. 3 days ago, 2 Genovese captains discussing the blue magic problem. Frank reads their words, their laughter about the animal in Harlem, their jokes about pinning the entire conspiracy on the black dealer while they negotiate immunity. They call him useful. They call him disposable. They call him everything except equal. The transcript shatters the last illusion Frank carried, that loyalty might flow both directions in a game rigged from birth. In the silence of his mind, Bumpy Johnson's ghost materializes like smoke from a dead cigar. The mentor's voice carries 30 years of street wisdom and final regret. The silent man lives, Frank. But what about the king who talks? What happens when the code becomes the cage? Frank closes his eyes, wrestling with mathematics that don't calculate. Bumpy's code was built on a foundation that never existed, the belief that honor among thieves meant something when the thieves wore different skin colors. Frank's empire proved the brutal truth. His loyalty was always one way. The Italians never saw him as equal. They saw him as a threat wearing the wrong complexion, someone to be tolerated until he could be eliminated. The realization builds like water behind a cracking dam. Frank's betrayal isn't betrayal, it's warfare. The system was designed to destroy him, and he's about to use their own corruption as the weapon that burns their empire to ash. You want names? Frank asks, his voice steady as a death sentence. I want the structure, Roberts replies. I'll give you the graveyards. Over 48 hours, Frank Lucas transforms from prisoner to professor, teaching federal prosecutors the mathematics of organized crime with surgical precision. He provides 107 names. Mafia captains who control the docks. Corrupt nip detectives who sell evidence for heroin money. Judges who take envelopes stuffed with cash. Politicians whose campaigns were paid with blood. Frank doesn't just talk. He draws maps, provides dates, explains the entire ecosystem that allowed the Italian Mafia to rule New York for half a century. The aftermath is biblical. 52 convictions follow like dominoes falling in perfect sequence. 3/4 of the NIP Narcotics Division gets indicted. 5 mafia families are crippled, their leadership decapitated, their stranglehold on heroin trafficking shattered. Frank serves only 5 years of a reduced sentence, but loses everything that made him legend: his reputation, his code, his chosen invisibility replaced by witness protection necessity. The philosophical question hangs like smoke in a rigged system designed to destroy you. Is breaking the code betrayal or evolution? Frank Lucas destroyed the Italian Mafia not with bullets, but with words, with mathematics, with the brutal truth that loyalty only matters when it flows both directions. 2019. A diner in Newark. Frank Lucas, 88 years old, sits in a corner booth wearing a $30 cardigan. The streets outside belong to a generation that doesn't remember his name. A journalist sits across from him, asking the question everyone wants answered. Do you regret becoming an informant? Frank stares out the window at streets that no longer belong to any king. The empire is dust. The legend is buried. He's silent for so long the journalist thinks he won't answer. I regret the coat, Frank says finally, voice quiet as a prayer. Everything else was just mathematics. The king who talked lived longer than the silent men who died in cages. But the cost was becoming invisible in a way Bumpy never intended, erased not by choice, but by survival. Was it worth it?